Good afternoon. My name is Noel Toynton, and I'm reading a short paper titled Critiquing the Political Economy. The morally blind neither perceive nor apperceive their blindness. In my three critiques of neoliberal ideology, I noted that such an exploration had to occur in the domain of the political economy, with the hyphen, as an account centred in either a political discipline or in an economic discipline would not allow us to understand the full extent and range of such an ideological frame of reference. Hence the discipline of the political hyphenated economy, and its subdisciplines of the political and economic. To this I also added a third subdiscipline of the stylistic domain, i.e. that sphere of interest that is critical of the political economy and observes to what extent and in what manner political economic anomalies are resolved, etc. i.e., for example, as found in the work of a critical political economist, that managed by business managers over an extended time frame, how compliance is formulated and executed, and so on. That the metaphorical lifeblood of the political economy is policies, and hence the need for policy formation, and preferably this should be conducted from an existential perspective. In such a sphere, the work of an earnest, non-ideologically beholden philosopher would be invaluable. Hence this background to the following exploration of the economic colonization of the political sphere by neoliberal ideology and allied ideologies. By colonization is meant the expansion of the neoliberal discourse as a major discourse not only within the field of economics, but also its pervasion into a number of other disciplines, and the consequences this has for how the political life world is to be viewed in general terms of reference, but which also inevitably seeps over into the redirection of our lives as lived day by day. In parallel to such an expansion, we also find a rampant colonization of the compactual, non-contractual dimension of our overall life world, and its subsequent diminution of its relatively existential orientation and complexion. Section 1, Introduction. In Jonathan Aldred's book License to be Bad, How Economics Corrupted Us, in his general discussion of economic imperialism, i.e. the extent the discipline of economics as currently constituted has influenced the thinking of various political worlds, either wittingly or unwittingly, he noted two propositions at the base of this expansionism. In the first proposition, he noted that economists make the theoretical generalization that all economic interactions are visualized and enacted as a win-win type of situation, overlooking the all-pervasive presence of exploitation, coercion, the desperation that a worker might experience in being forced to contract out their labour in a market without a living wage, etc. A second proposition, and equally pervasive in a corrupting sense, is that all value is determined by the marketplace, by the price put on that specific commodity, service, and or labour supplied. Let me restate these two propositions in as simple a propositional form as possible. 1. All economic interactions are win-win types of events for all directly involved parties. Otherwise, those arrangements would not be entered into, according to economists. 2. In the marketplace, all value is reflected in the price paid. i.e., in the marketplace, all value is reflected in price. Translated to a political sphere, what do we find as a consequence of such observed economic colonization? The unwitting assent being given to these two fundamental propositions, albeit as to be viewed and expedited in and through a relatively political frame of reference, within the relative ubiquity of the overall political economic life world, namely that all political interactions are exercised in a win-win type of situation, and the political value of a person or organisation is set by the market, or in a market-like style of formulation and application. As a major discourse, this neoliberal ideological thinking has contaminated the political marketplace as well. In other words, certain values have been excessively preferenced, and other types of value have been quite severely discounted, if not considerably overlooked. Let me restate these two propositions translated into a political sphere in as simple a propositional form as possible. All political interactions are win-win types of events for all the parties being directly represented. In the political economy, all value is reflected in price, i.e., for example, what people are paid, or are prepared to pay, or accept what other people are being paid. In the short paper, let me demonstrate the unwelcome aspect of this form of economic imperialism, this colonisation of the political economy from the sphere of the economic, as exerted under the heavy hand of an all-pervasive neoliberally influenced ideology. Section 2. Exposition. In recent months, Australia has suffered from mega fires, floods, COVID-19 and an ensuing economic recession in the wake of this pandemic. On balance, we must be grateful that Australia is both resilient and resourceful. I believe the current consensus is that we should have gone into lockdown mode sooner, but that once we did, some success has been achieved, although tarnished somewhat by other mistakes made along the way. For example, hotel quarantine was not properly organised and supervised. A first lockdown was left too quickly at the instigation of business voices and certain politicians who expressed a misplaced concern about a so-called sick economy. A lack of personal protective equipment, along with a shortage of masks at the beginning of this pandemic. Still, despite my criticisms as expressed here, like I said, Australia has displayed a remarkable degree of resilience and resourcefulness. But, as the current Prime Minister Scott Morrison has said in Parliament, we are all in this together. We will get through this together, Australia. However, the succession of current crises has shone a powerful spotlight on the inequalities of the Australian demographic landscape. The more vulnerable people in society have been the most affected by this pandemic, along with its economic downturn. In this regard, on an open-ended list, we would have to put the care of the elderly in nursing homes, people on low incomes living in public accommodation, so-called essential workers who, despite such wonderful rebranding, are usually on or just above the minimum wage, the young already exposed to inadequate levels in employment opportunities, students of all descriptions, saddled with both the decline in the standards of instruction and the increasing costs of such education, and who all too often have to live in crowded rental accommodation. People who cannot work from home and have had to commute long distances on public transport to get to their place of employment. Workers in the hospitality industry, Indigenous poverty, gender and wage inequalities, people who have retired and trying to live on a rapidly diminishing investment income, and so on. One only has to remember recently that we all saw long lines of people outside a local Centrelink to find an echo of what our parents and grandparents told us about when they recounted their experiences which they had during the Great Depression. The government, in its wisdom, came to the rescue by rewriting a miserly New Start with a coronavirus supplement as job seeker, and those already recently employed but at imminent risk of unemployment were offered an entirely new product called JobKeeper, where employers who could demonstrate a loss of business income were paid to pay their staff and themselves a certain amount each fortnight. We are all in this together. We will get through this together, Australia. You would think that an unemployed person, even if still unemployed on paper, is just as unemployed as any other unemployed person. But no, in Australia, once known for its lack of class structure, despite a remnant Scottocracy, now puts an even greater price on the heads of certain unemployed persons, or rather some relatively more privileged unemployed people. From the 30th of March, those eligible for JobKeeper were allotted $1,500 a fortnight, and those already on New Start were rebranded on the 20th of March as job seekers, with the old amount, plus a corona supplement, which came to $1,065.70 per fortnight. Unfortunately, despite lockdown continuing in Melbourne and Victoria, the fortunes of such folks, starting from the 28th of September, has been revalued downwards, with those on JobKeeper now getting $1,200 and those on JobSeeker now getting $815.70 per fortnight. Into this mix, a single pensioner still gets $944.30 per fortnight. But alas, most visa holders get nothing, along with international students who are allowed to work 20 hours a week, usually finding part-time employment in the hospitality industry. They did get some advice from the PM that they would be better heading back to their country of origin, despite the fees that they had to pay to get to come here, along with endless paperwork that might well have taken a year and a half to finalise, and the exorbitant cost often being charged by airlines bumping economy customers for those prepared to pay higher rates to secure a seat in such an erratic market, all subject to quotas and other restrictions, etc. As I noted, an unemployed person is an unemployed person, like any other unemployed person, and without a doubt subject to all the many difficulties to be faced, like, for example, the costs of accommodation, food, along with all the other charges to be incurred in the course of their lives as lived from one day to the next. We are all in this together. We will get through this together, Australia. As I remarked earlier, in this contemporary era, under the heavy influence of a neoliberal ideology, we now have the value of an unemployed person expressed in dollars, depending on the date, and a fluctuating price somewhere between $1,500 and $0 per fortnight. Currently, from the 28th of September, JobKeeper payment is now reduced to $1,200 if on Tier 1. Tier 2 is reduced to $750, and JobSeeker is now reduced to $815.70. Pensioners stay the same. Most visa holders and international students still get zilch. With a complete lack of charity, in a cold, careless calculation, in an ominous display exhibiting the total lack of a following of intuitively understood rules of hospitality, found at the very centre of the Christian profession and those of other faiths, the newly dispossessed are treated as if they do not exist, merely advised to return to their countries of origin, or be left alone and dependent upon their savings, remittances from their families overseas and local charities, and so forth. Sadly, such a lack of care and concern will poorly serve the future interests of Australia, and we all remain so quiet, so complicit in this unequal, non-compassionate lottery of life. Why? First, there were refugees, shamefully treated. Then there were visa holders and international students, so one must wonder who is next. Obviously, the unemployed, but not quite so much the more recently unemployed, although both have been discounted, no longer so valued as just previously noted, worth X dollars one day and the next worth even less. We are all in this together. We will get through this together, Australia. This refrain, as noted, comes from a speech the Prime Minister gave in Parliament on the 8th of April 2020. In the same speech he also states, "And above all, our sovereignty is sustained by what we believe as Australians, what we value and hold most dear, our principles, our way of doing things. We will never surrender this, so make no mistake, today is not about ideologies, we check those at the door." Unfortunately, I dispute this as being the Australian way of doing things. As Australian principles and values should be understood, all unemployed people should be treated equally, or at least such treatment perhaps adjusted only in the light of their individual predicaments. In this regard, the Prime Minister deserves a D, but alas, the silent public, ourselves, as complicit in this through our sheer silence, can only deserve an F, for not steadfastly and successfully taking him and the government, indeed most political parties, to task on the same issue. Why is this anomalous situation not perceived as such is even more worrying. It would seem that not all ideologies are left checked at the door of Parliament. Jonathan Eldred, in his book Licence to be Bad, How Economics Has Corrupted Us, is right. We have all been corrupted by an economic imperialism, a neoliberal faith that treats people with a value only supported by what the political marketplace is prepared to pay. In the light of this observation, we should also recognise the sad fact that in the functioning of our democracies, all people are not equally represented. As a number of philosophers, economists, even billionaires have pointed out, this recipe for inequality and continuing economic inequity is on the road to deconstructing our democracies and handing them over to the populists, like, for example, President Trump. Need I say more? In the barely contested grip of a major discourse like neoliberalism, along with its wealthy allies in the world of business, and by default the demanding demagogues of populism, can we not see the mental prison we have made for ourselves? Even to question the contracting walls of such an ideology from within this ideology is almost an impossible task. But as long as we remain silent, paid off, bought off, mesmerised by a sophistry of endless subtle details, we are all complicit in this tragic set piece of a drama that is continually unfolding before us, if not accelerating in an overall downward descent to who knows where. Thank you.